Hey guys, it's Mark. So our garage is actually full of Christmas stuff. So I'm actually filming this from my little corner office in our bedroom. Today is all about woodworking and building cabinets. So this video actually took about 2 weeks to put together. So we're gonna start it after the first set of cabinets is built, and we're gonna show you the design, how we put it all together, and how we chose to attach it to the van. And then we're gonna cut to a second set of cabinets where we start at the absolute beginning and show you each step of the process in getting the cabinets built and completed. So really looking forward to going through this. It's kind of cold. I got my jacket, I got my coffee. Let's get to it. Okay, so we finally got one of our cabinets pretty much built. This might be the most intimidating project we've taken on in this van because neither of us have ever built cabinets before. I'm okay with woodworking, but never done anything like this. Certainly never did it in the van. So it was kind of intimidating, but there's a lot of great resources online. So we took ideas from a bunch of different videos and we came up with this way to do it. So we were really trying to do three things. We want it to be really strong, we want it to be really light, and we want it to be secured to the wall really well. So actually, if you go back a couple videos in our series, you'll see an entire video that we do on how we set up our framing to make sure that we can secure these to the wall later on, because that's a big concern, right? If we hit something in the van, if something hits us, the force on this thing is going to be pretty incredible. So we want to make sure it's secured to the sides of the walls really well. So what we've done here is we've used two different kinds of wood. We used Baltic Birch, which is not available everywhere, but we did get lucky and find it at a big lumber store near Atlanta. And we used Select Pine. So the Baltic Birch is in three different sizes. We used 3/4, we used 1/2, and then this is going to get faced with 1/4 inch Baltic Birch plywood. And the only other wood is that Select 1x2 pine that we got at the local big box store. So we chose to use the kind of heavy 3/4 inch plywood because we knew we were going to have to attach a face frame to here. We knew we were going to be doing a lot of gluing into here. We felt that extra thickness would be beneficial to us. So it's a little bit heavier than the 1/2 inch, but we thought we're only using it in a couple places, so it should be real beneficial. Once we had those cut to size, and we'll show you how we did that in just a little bit, we cut out some notches here to accept these 1x2 pieces of wood, glued and screwed them in place to hold them, and then we finally cut the angle piece out of 1/2 inch Baltic Birch plywood. It extends a little past here because we're going to build a shelf next to the cabinet, so that's why it looks the way it does. But it feels incredibly solid, and it's really much lighter than I expected it to be. I don't know how much this weighs, but it is really pretty light, and it's extremely sturdy. So we're happy with the way it came out. So the next thing to do now is to cover the sides of this with 1/4 inch Baltic Birch plywood and then attach it to the roof and the walls. Okay, so it's the next day and I've gone ahead and I've attached the quarter inch Baltic Birch plywood to the edges of this, and so our first cabinet is pretty much completed. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's really strong. The Baltic Birch skin has added a little bit of weight, but it's still relatively light. We've got some holes to accept the 1/4 bolts that are already in the steel structure of the van to hold it nice and tight. We've got another hole that's going to allow us to put the wire through for the puck light. So now all we've got to do is go to the van and install it. Well, my friends, it's done. So the first cabinet is finally hung. Right now, all it's holding it in place is 2 plus nuts that are going through some framing into the steel structure of the van. And if you remember a couple episodes back, we framed it specifically to be able to do this. So right now, 2 plus nuts are holding it. It's actually going to be 4 when we put it in for good, plus some some cabinet screws into the ceiling and some cabinet screws into the wall. So it should be rock solid. It's nice and light, looks good. So what we're going to do now is go to the front of the van, start over, and show you exactly from step 1 how we got to this point. So the first thing you've got to do when you build one of these cabinets is figure out what the profile of some of it's got to look like to fit within this space. So Because I've got these angles here, I didn't quite know what they were. I basically started by cutting a piece of cardboard, kind of the size of what one of the side of the cabinets would look like. This is probably a 12-inch square, maybe just a little bit bigger than that. And I've got to figure out how to fit this into this space, which obviously it's not doing right now. So I basically started with my protractor. So took the protractor, measured this first angle on the bottom, and I went ahead and traced that onto my piece of cardboard, and I drew the two lines and I cut along those two lines. Once I had that, it basically had this kind of shape. So now you can see we're starting to get better. It fits on the wall. It sort of fits in here in this angled area. The top obviously does not work at all, but it's getting closer, and that's all this is about, getting closer and closer. So I then took my protractor again, I measured this top angle, and I drew it along this piece, and I kind of had to cut and play with how long I made this corner right here, but just trial and error and you figure it out. Once I do that, we're starting to get a little bit closer. So now I've got this piece. Fragile, must be Italian. So I've got this, it's pretty close, but now it's just a matter of literally taking your pencil, which I can never find when I'm doing these videos. Here we go. So taking a pencil and running it along the ceiling and cutting, getting closer and closer, and eventually just do that kind of methodically, and you'll eventually end up with a piece that fits. So it takes a little work to get there, but it's worth taking a little extra time, doing it right, and then it'll all fit together later. All right, so now we've got one more problem. We've got everything scribed to the ceiling, this corner piece, and the wall just fine. But what about this and this? Even if we know if these two pieces are square, we don't really know. Remember, you can't really use a level in a van. But we know we want this plane right here. We want the bottom of the cabinets, we want this parallel to the floor. We know that. And we'd like to have this perpendicular to the floor. So even if the van's on an angle, kind of the floor of the van is sort of our level point. We just got to be able to take our measurements off of that. So I'm going to show you what I did. This is where my daughter says, "Daddy, so extra." Watch. So I actually had to shoot this from outside the van because this contraption is a little too big to film it all in one shot. So basically what I've done is built my own sort of square. My dad used to do stuff like this all the time. So basically what I want to make sure is that my cabinets are parallel to the floor and the front of my cabinets are perpendicular to the floor. So what I do is basically I built a square. So this, I measured this. This is completely 90 degrees right here. I also measured these to be completely 90 degrees, right? So if you remember your 10th grade geometry, if this is perpendicular to this, and this is perpendicular to this, then that and that must be parallel. So what that means is the bottom of my cabinets is parallel to the floor, and the front of my cabinets is perpendicular to the floor. So that's a lot of gobbledygook, but let me get in there and show you how it works. Okay, so we've got this piece that we know fits in really well here, and what we want to do is make sure that this bottom is going to be parallel to the floor, and that this is going to be perpendicular to this, so that this is basically a right angle. And there's really no way to do it. You can't measure it with a square because you don't know what's level and what's not. So I bring in my handy dandy tool, and as long as I stand on the bottom and make sure that it's flush to the ground, I know that I can stand this against here. And now I can take my pencil, and it's better if Tania's here helping. If I run the pencil along these two edges, I now know that I have a pair of edges that are curved. So once I stand this up next to here, next to my piece of cardboard, I can basically take my pencil, and if I can trace along these edges here, I know that I now have two edges that are perpendicular and parallel to the floor. So I cut my wood along these two edges, along those two lines, and I'm all set. Is it a little bit extra? Probably. Not the first time I overdid anything. So once I had my templates all cut out with the cardboard, I traced it onto a piece of 1/8" plywood, and I did the same thing just to make sure all the pieces fit before I went to my expensive Baltic Birch plywood. Once those 1/8" pieces fit, I transferred those dimensions to my 3/4" Baltic Birch plywood and cut them out. So now I've got 3 of those pieces, and what I've done is I've gone ahead and attached those all to a 1x2 strip. It's not going to stay there permanently. It's just something that allows me to hold the 3 pieces up so that I can see if I'm basically in the right place. Now I know the ceiling does lift up here, so I'll need a bit of a spacer here, probably a 1/4" spacer, but this allows me to basically put these in position, and I can see that this fits pretty darn good. Now here's where I'm going to have to put that spacer bar in here. I knew that, but everything else fits really nicely. So now I know I can start attaching these and building my cabinet out of them. All right, so we're now back in the garage, and which is now covered with Christmas stuff and Thanksgiving stuff and van stuff, so it's pretty much a mess, but we're working around it. So I've got the pieces that I used, the template pieces I cut out of cardboard. I went ahead and traced those onto my thin plywood. I think this is probably, I don't know, 3/16, something like that, some cheap plywood that I found. Traced the pieces out, make sure everything fit correctly, and then I traced those onto my 3/4" Baltic Birch. So I've got those here, and they're clamped together. I actually cut these all together as one unit, so they were all the same. Now I know in there's some slight variations to each of the 3 pieces, but I found that if you make them each a little bit differently, now all your joints are not 90 degrees, none of the joints fit properly. So what I do is I just make everything the same as far as these 3 pieces. Everything gets put together with really strong joints, and then I can always shim it in place when I need to get it into the van. So I've got all 3 pieces. I have sanded them so they're all nice and flush, and now I'm going to start cutting the rabbets, which are those little corner pieces that are going to accept the cross braces. So I'll show you. So now we've got the corners of these end pieces notched to accept these, the 1x2 pine cross beams. Obviously they're going to be longer than this, but you can kind of see how they fit in. One will go here, one here, and one down here. They'll be glued and screwed in place across all 3 of these pieces. There's also going to be a piece of 1/2" Baltic Birch for the angled corner. So I'd like to do more, but I got to fix our dishwasher. Never did this before, but we got to figure out how to do it. And I got 2 loaves of bread to bake. So yeah, van's going to have to wait. And that's what I'm talking about. Day after Thanksgiving, I'd like to lay on the couch and work off the 12,000 calories I ate yesterday, but I got to get this cabinet done. So we're going to keep going. So we've got our 3 pieces done, the 2 end pieces and the middle piece. Now we've got to cut these support pieces out of the 1x2 select pine. We're going to cut 3 of them the same length, and then we're going to start to glue and screw them together. And then we should be close to done with this cabinet, except for putting the skins on it. So since I need these 3 pieces to be exactly the same length, I tend to cut them together. What I'll do is I'll flush one end, and then I'll cut all 3 of them together so that I'm assured these are completely the same length, and now I'll start to glue them and screw them onto those side pieces. So as is always the case, it took a lot longer than I expected, but the shell of this cabinet is now done. So basically all I did was screw and glue these pieces into the notches. There were places where I was a little bit off and I had to shim a little bit, but no big deal, everything's glued. And then I took a sander and kind of sanded all these edges down. So this is it. Again, pretty solid. I mean, pretty light, very solid, but really quite light. So I'm pretty happy with the way that came out. Now I've got to cut this piece here. So this is going to be a piece of 1/2-inch Baltic Birch plywood, and I'm going to run it the length of this. Actually, I'm going to extend it a little bit because we don't have the van with us right now. So I'm probably going to bring it out to about here, and then I'll figure out when I get the van where I have to cut it. But we'll go ahead and rip this length here on the table saw and go ahead and attach this flat 1/2-inch Baltic Birch across this face. So here's what the 1/2-inch piece looks like on here. I've cut it to the length of this angled corner right here, this angled piece. I had hoped to leave it cut like this, but then I realized when I butt up the 1/4-inch plywood to it, it's not going to match up. There's going to be this height difference. So what I'll probably do is I will probably run this to the table saw and cut it something like this. And this I will cut, trying to get that in focus, something like this. And then when I put up I can bring the 1/4-inch piece right to here and just cut it at that angle. It should match up really nicely. So I've gone ahead and ripped this, and you can see it's pretty close. I won't say it's perfect, but it's pretty darn close. This is kind of hard to do because the angles that you measure here and down here are typically more than the saw blade will tilt. So you end up having to run it, you end up having to measure the opposing angle and running it vertically through here. So I've got this kind of sacrificial piece of wood that sits against my fence, and then I run the length of it through here, and that makes the cut. So now I can go ahead and should be able to screw this onto here, here, and here, and then all I've left is the face pieces out of 1/4-inch Baltic Birch. So because this angle is too big for my table, too big of an angle for the table saw, what I basically did was took there's probably a geometry name for this angle, I don't know what it is, but I put a square over here, and then I measured the angle. This is hard to do with one hand, but I basically measured this angle here. Right? I hope that's right. I can't really see, but this angle is something I can hit with the table saw. So now I go over, I set the table saw this way, and instead of running the wood horizontally, I run it vertically through the table saw and slice it. Home stretch, now that everything's cut to length and ripped properly, we're going to go ahead and glue it and nail it in place. We're going to use 1-inch brad nails and some woodworking glue. So we have this piece, we have the top, and we have the side. So here it is, second cabinet completed. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and put some plastic wood in some of those corners and then give it a good sanding and painting, and we should be go. Actually, I'll sand it, Tania will paint it. But this is the completed cabinet, so it's got some sides and back so you can't see the walls of the van through it. We will put the bottom and the face frame on last after we got them installed. But now we don't have the van here, as you can see, so we've got to actually take this to the van and test fit it and figure out where the holes for the plus nuts have to go in those two corners. So that's next, but we're almost done.
So we're trying to do a dry fit on the cabinet that Marc has built. So there is an under light cabinet, under light, did I say that right?
Under cabinet light wire.
Under cabinet light wire. And in order to make sure that it fits correctly, we've had to drill a hole in the cabinet and it's not fitting well. So we learned, or Marc found out about this trick with Silla putty. So, and also had to get, was it called a wrench? And so we had to see which one of these sockets, what's it called? Bolts, I don't know, whatever I don't call right, Marc will let you know what it is. But anyway, so this is girl lingo. Marc, why don't you come join us?
Let me try. You did great, by the way. You did awesome. So we're ready to dry fit the cabinet. Now we've got 4 or 5 1/4 20 bolts through some plus nuts. One of them is stripped, so we'll never get that thing out. But what we've tried to do is back out a couple of the 1/4 20 bolts. We want to actually drill a hole through the cabinet and then reinsert the bolts through the cabinet and into the plus nuts, which will make them really, really, really secure. The problem is finding out where those bolts are. So enter this stuff. Silly putty? Play-Doh. It's Play-Doh.
Yeah. Oh, Play-Doh.
I always call it silly putty, but it's Play-Doh.
Yeah, you call it
so you smear some of this stuff on the back, kind of where you think the holes are, and then you push it up against there, and it should make a mark and show you where all those bolts are. We're going to try.
Now we start an hour-long battle between Play-Doh, wood, and our patience. This should have been really easy. Just smear some balls of Play-Doh on the back of our cabinet, press into position, and drill holes through the indents in the Play-Doh. But if you've been watching our channel, you know nothing goes as planned. On our first attempt, we had some of the Play-Doh in the wrong spot, so we started over. On attempt number 2, a bunch of the Play-Doh stuck to the wall instead of the cabinet. Again, we start over. Then, on take 3...
So, want to help me hold this? Look at that.
Ta-da!
So, all we have to do now is drill in those places and we will be good to go. So, 1/4 20, 1/4 inch bolt, 1/4 inch, let's do that. Okay, we'll be right back. So once you've got the holes marked out with the Play-Doh, what I do is drill a small hole through the center of it. So you've got a hole through the center of all these markings here. Once that's done, you can actually remove this stuff. And now these holes should line up with the 1/4 20 bolts that are in there. So we should be able to pull drill these holes, pull the 1/4 20 bolts and reattach them through these holes so that the cabinet is held up really by the steel structure of the van, which is really solid. So that's the next step. So once I had those little pilot holes, I went back with my 1/4 inch bit. Actually, I think this is a little bigger. And I made the holes big enough to accept a 1/4 20 bolt. And then we test fit it back into the cabinet on the van, and it fits really nicely. So I don't want to mess with it again. We didn't film when we put it up because we were actually worried it wasn't going to, but it did fit really well. Now I did have to take these are the bolts I had in there beforehand. Once I took them out and put them through the cabinets as well, I had to add a 1/2 inch, so I've gone to these longer bolts. So this will actually pass through these holes and into the skin of the van. So there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4 of those into the actual frame of the van. So this will be rock solid. I've also gone ahead and put some plastic wood and sanded it. The next job is to start painting. All right, guys, with that, I think we're going to call this video a wrap. Hopefully you had a good idea of how we built our cabinets, and hopefully it'll give you some good incentive for how you build your own. This is not the only way to do it, obviously, but it's the way that we felt was best for us. So really hope you enjoyed the video. Go ahead and give us a thumbs up if you did, and we hope you'll subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Keep those comments coming down below. They've been a huge help. We'll be back next week to work on the benches, and we're going to start laying out some of the electrical components. So a lot of exciting stuff going on. Until then, we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.